"Let me finish, Congresswoman," Bill O'Reilly demanded, his voice rising as he leaned forward aggressively in his chair. The studio lights reflected off his forehead as he cut off Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett for the fifth time in less than 8 minutes. The Fox Nation special interview that was supposed to be about new legislation had turned into another O'Reilly interruption festival. Viewers at home could see Crockett's composed expression, her hands calmly folded on her lap despite the repeated disruptions. "With all due respect, Mr. O'Reilly," she began, her voice measured but firm. "This is the 5th time you've—" "I asked the questions here," O'Reilly interjected, pointing his pen directly at her. "That's how this works. Now answer the question about your party's supposed economic plan without the political spin." What happened next wasn't just unexpected, it was unprecedented in O'Reilly's decades-long broadcasting career. Crockett's response didn't just silence the famously combative host, it left him visibly stunned as millions watched live. The clip would be viewed over 50 million times in the next 24 hours, with commentators calling it the moment Bill O'Reilly finally met his match, and a masterclass in handling media bullies. Before we reveal exactly what Congresswoman Crockett said, that left O'Reilly speechless and changed the dynamics of political interviews forever. Hit that like button and subscribe to see more moments when political figures face unexpected challenges on national television. Have you ever witnessed someone repeatedly interrupted finally stand their ground? What happened? Share your thoughts in the comments below. This interview had been months in the making. Bill O'Reilly, once the undisputed king of cable news before his controversial departure from Fox News, had been rebuilding his brand through his independent platform and Fox Nation specials. At 73, O'Reilly remained committed to his confrontational interviewing style that had made him famous in the early 2000s, interrupting guests, talking over responses he disliked, and dismissing points with his signature "that's ridiculous" catchphrase. O'Reilly built his career on controlling the conversation, explained media analyst Jennifer Crawford. His strategy has always been simple but effective. Interrupt to throw guests off balance, then attack their credibility while they're trying to recover. It's not about dialogue, it's about dominance. This approach had served O'Reilly well with politicians unaccustomed to such aggressive tactics. His producer had specifically targeted Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett for his Accountability series, expecting the first-term representative would be easily rattled by O'Reilly's trademark intimidation. Bill believed Crockett would be an easy target, revealed a production assistant who requested anonymity. He told staff before the interview, these freshman representatives always crumble under pressure. They're used to softball questions and friendly podcasts. What O'Reilly and his team failed to recognize was Jasmine Crockett's background before entering Congress. Unlike many politicians who came from policy think tanks or family political dynasties, Crockett had spent 15 years as a trial attorney in Texas, handling high-stakes criminal defense and civil rights cases in notoriously hostile courtrooms. People who underestimate Congresswoman Crockett don't understand her background, explained former colleague Marcus Washington. Before politics, she faced aggressive prosecutors and hostile judges daily. She's been interrupted by experts and stood her ground in courtrooms where the stakes weren't ratings. They were people's freedom and constitutional rights. Born to working-class parents in St. Louis, Crockett had worked her way through college and law school before building a reputation as an unflappable presence in the courtroom. Her transition to politics came after successfully challenging systemic inequities in the Texas criminal justice system, winning landmark cases despite constant opposition from established power structures. Since entering Congress, Crockett had maintained a relatively low media profile, focusing on legislative work rather than cable news appearances. When O'Reilly's team requested an interview about her economic development bill, her staff initially hesitated. "We knew O'Reilly's reputation," said Communications Director Alicia Thomas, but the Congresswoman saw an opportunity to reach viewers who might never hear about her legislation otherwise. She told us, "I've faced tougher opponents than Bill O'Reilly in courtrooms where the rules weren't tilted in my favor." The interview was scheduled for O'Reilly's primetime Fox Nation special, with promotions promising a no-holds-barred discussion with one of the progressive movement's rising stars. Behind the scenes, O'Reilly's production team prepared a strategy designed to provoke an emotional response, rather than facilitate substantive discussion. The pre-interview brief was clear, the anonymous production assistant revealed. Keep her on defense, interrupt any detailed explanations, and push for sound bites that could be used in later segments. The goal wasn't to understand her position, but to create moments where she appeared flustered or angry. As the cameras prepared to roll, O'Reilly reviewed his notes with characteristic confidence. "This will be over in 15 minutes, he reportedly told a producer. These political newcomers never know what hit them. What O'Reilly didn't realize was that Crockett had spent the previous evening reviewing dozens of his interviews, identifying his patterns of interruption and the specific moments when he typically cut off guests. She had also prepared concise responses to likely questions, anticipating his interruption strategy. As the studio lights came up and the countdown to live broadcast began, O'Reilly gave Crockett the cursory handshake he offered all guests, not bothering to engage in the usual pre-camera small talk. He clearly viewed this as a routine interview with a political novice, another opportunity to demonstrate his dominance over an unsuspecting guest. Both participants were prepared for a confrontation, but only one had accurately assessed their opponent. The stage was set for a television moment that would soon explode across social media and change how millions viewed political interviews. Why do you think some interviewers rely on interruption as a tactic? Has it ever worked against them in your experience? Share your observations in the comments. The interview began cordially enough. O'Reilly introduced Crockett with minimal enthusiasm, mentioning her background as a former attorney now representing Texas in Congress. His first question seemed straightforward. Your economic development bill proposes investments in underserved communities. How do you justify another government spending program when inflation remains a concern? Crockett began her response, "Thank you for having me, Bill. This legislation actually addresses inflation concerns by targeting root causes of economic stagnation in—" "But it's more government spending," O'Reilly interrupted, barely 10 seconds into her answer. "That's a fact, isn't it? More taxpayer dollars." This first interruption, a classic O'Reilly tactic designed to throw a guest off balance, would typically force a defensive response. But Crockett merely paused, smiled slightly, and continued without showing frustration. "If I could finish my point, this program is fully offset by closing specific tax loopholes that currently—" "Tax loopholes. Always the same talking point," O'Reilly cut in again, shaking his head dismissively. "Let's be honest with the viewers. This is wealth redistribution with a new name, isn't it?" The pattern continued as O'Reilly systematically interrupted each of Crockett's attempts to explain the legislation's details. His third interruption came with increased volume and a dismissive wave of his hand. "Congresswoman, our viewers aren't interested in legislative minutia. They want to know why Democrats always reach for spending as the solution to every problem." Each interruption grew more aggressive, with O'Reilly's fourth attempt, including his trademark pen-pointing gesture. "You're filibustering instead of answering the question directly." Through each disruption, Crockett maintained remarkable composure, attempting to redirect to substantive points about economic data and community investment outcomes. The studio crew exchanged glances as she remained calm, despite O'Reilly's escalating tactics, clearly not following the usual script of flustered guests. The fifth interruption proved the most aggressive. As Crockett began citing economic studies supporting targeted community investment, O'Reilly cut her off mid-sentence. "Let me finish, Congresswoman. That's how this works. I ask questions, you give straight answers without the political spin. Now answer the question about your party's supposed economic plan." The tension in the studio was palpable. O'Reilly's expression showed growing frustration that his usual dominant strategy wasn't producing the desired effect. Viewers could see Crockett take a deliberate breath before responding. "Mr. O'Reilly," she began, her voice firm but not raised. "This is the 5th time you've interrupted me in less than 8 minutes. I've been respectful and attempted to provide substantive answers to your questions. If you're interested in actual dialogue rather than creating conflict, for ratings, I'm happy to continue. If not, we can end this interview now, and I'll gladly discuss my legislation with journalists interested in its actual content." The studio fell silent. O'Reilly, clearly unprepared for this direct challenge to his interviewing tactics, adjusted in his chair. For perhaps the first time in his broadcasting career, He seemed momentarily unsure how to respond. The power dynamic had shifted visibly. "I'm giving you tough questions because that's what journalists do," he replied, his tone slightly defensive. "If you can't handle direct questioning—" "I welcome tough questions, Mr. O'Reilly," Crockett interjected calmly. "What I don't welcome is being invited for an interview where I'm not actually permitted to answer those questions. There's a difference between tough questioning and performative interruption." O'Reilly's face tightened as he realized this interview wasn't following his usual script. Camera operators later reported they had never seen him so visibly thrown off balance. In a transparent attempt to regain control, he shifted topics abruptly. "Let's move on to crime rates in major cities. Your party has consistently—" "I'd be happy to discuss that topic," Crockett replied, "but I want to confirm first. Will you allow me to complete my answers, or should viewers expect more interruptions?" This direct challenge to his interviewing style, delivered without anger but with unmistakable firmness, created a moment of genuine tension. Production staff described seeing O'Reilly's demeanors change as he realized his usual intimidation tactics weren't working. "I allow all my guests to answer," he claimed, despite the previous 5 interruptions providing clear evidence to the contrary. "But I don't allow filibustering or talking points. Substantive answers require context, especially for complex issues," Crockett responded. "If you label every detailed explanation as a filibuster while accepting oversimplified answers that lack nuance, you're not serving your viewers' understanding. You're undermining it." O'Reilly, now visibly irritated that his authority was being questioned, attempted to reassert control with his 6th question. "Let me try once more, Congresswoman. In simple terms, without the political spin, explain why your economic approach isn't just another tax and spend liberal policy that's failed countless times before." The dismissive framing and condescending tone made clear O'Reilly expected either an emotional response or a defensive retreat. The studio crew held their breath, waiting for Crockett's reaction to this deliberate provocation. "Have you noticed how some media figures use interruption as a power move rather than seeking actual answers? What other tactics do you see used to control narratives in interviews? Share your insights below." What happened next would be replayed millions of times across social media platforms and news programs for weeks to come. Instead of responding with defensiveness or matching O'Reilly's confrontational tone, Congresswoman Crockett smiled slightly and delivered the response that would leave him visibly stunned. "Mr. O'Reilly, I'm going to answer your question thoroughly, and I'd appreciate the professional courtesy of not being interrupted again," she began, her voice calm but authoritative. "Before entering Congress, I spent 15 years in courtrooms where interrupting opposing counsel or witnesses would result in sanctions from the judge. Professional debate requires allowing participants to complete their thoughts." She paused briefly, maintaining direct eye contact with O'Reilly, who appeared momentarily unsure how to respond to this direct challenge to his interviewing approach. "Now, regarding your question about economic policy, the legislation I've proposed isn't a traditional government spending program, but a public-private partnership model that leverages initial government investment to attract significantly larger private capital. For every federal dollar, we're seeing $9 of private investment in pilot programs." She continued with remarkable precision, citing specific data points and economic outcomes without referencing notes. Communities that have implemented similar models have seen median household income increase by 23% over 5 years. Small business formation rates double, and property values stabilize without displacing existing residents. As O'Reilly opened his mouth to interrupt again, Crockett raised her hand slightly, a subtle but unmistakable courtroom gesture requesting she be allowed to finish. The approach is based on economic models developed by Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz and has received bipartisan support in state legislatures where similar programs have been implemented. In fact, Republican Governor Phil Scott of Vermont recently praised the model's fiscal responsibility and return on investment. She concluded with the statement that would leave O'Reilly visibly stunned. "So, to directly answer your question, this isn't a tax and spend liberal policy, but an evidence-based economic development strategy that conservative economists from Milton Friedman to Friedrich Hayek have advocated. Targeted investment that creates the conditions for market forces to work more efficiently while requiring measurable outcomes and sunset provisions if those benchmarks aren't met. I welcome tough questions about this approach, but those questions should be based on the actual policy rather than partisan caricatures. The studio fell completely silent. O'Reilly, who had built a career on controlling interviews through interruption and intimidation, found himself in unfamiliar territory. For perhaps the first time in his broadcasting career, he had no immediate response. The cameras captured his momentary confusion as he shuffled papers, clearly unprepared for such a substantive, measured answer that had preemptively addressed his likely counterarguments. After several seconds of uncharacteristic silence, O'Reilly attempted to recover. "Well, that sounds good in theory, but..." "It's not just theory," Crockett interjected, now using his own tactic against him. "We have 5 years of data from pilot programs in Texas, Ohio, and Pennsylvania showing exactly these results. I'm happy to provide your team with the economic analysis from the Brookings Institution and American Enterprise Institute, both of which reach similar conclusions about the model's effectiveness." The power dynamic had shifted completely. O'Reilly, now defensive rather than offensive, struggled to regain control of the interview. "Our viewers don't need an economics lecture," he attempted, trying to dismiss her response. "Your viewers deserve accurate information about policies that affect their communities," Crockett countered calmly. "If providing factual context is considered a lecture, perhaps that reveals more about the usual depth of policy discussions on this program than about my answers." This response, delivered without anger but with unmistakable precision, left O'Reilly visibly flustered. The host who had built his brand on never being at a loss for words found himself exactly that. In the control room, producers watched in astonishment as the usually dominant O'Reilly struggled to reassert control. "We need to go to break," one suggested urgently into O'Reilly's earpiece, hoping to rescue him from the increasingly uncomfortable situation. "We'll take a quick break and continue this discussion," O'Reilly announced, his relief at the interruption evident. "More with Congresswoman Crockett when we return." As the cameras cut away, O'Reilly removed his microphone and immediately summoned his executive producer. Crew members reported hearing him demand, "Why wasn't I briefed properly about her background? She's not your typical congressional representative." Meanwhile, Crockett remained composed in her chair, calmly reviewing notes for the segment's continuation. Unlike most guests who appeared shaken after confrontations with O'Reilly, she showed no signs of stress or concern. When the program returned from commercial break, viewers immediately noticed a change in O'Reilly's approach. Gone was the aggressive interrupting and dismissive tone, replaced by noticeably more respectful questioning and, remarkably, allowing Crockett to complete her responses. The production assistant later revealed, "I've never seen anything like it." O'Reilly completely changed his interview style mid-segment. He actually listened to her answers. That just doesn't happen. By the interview's conclusion, what had begun as an attempted ambush had transformed into something O'Reilly rarely delivered, a substantive policy discussion. Viewers witnessed not just a change in tone, but a visible shift in the power dynamic between host and guest. As the segment ended, O'Reilly extended his hand with newfound respect. "Congresswoman Crockett, appreciate your time today. Clearly you've done your homework on these issues." It was as close to an on-air concession as O'Reilly had ever offered. Has someone ever completely changed their approach to you mid-conversation when they realized their usual tactics weren't working? What happened? Share your experience in the comments. The impact of Crockett's appearance was immediate and far-reaching. Within hours, clips of her response after O'Reilly's fifth interruption spread across social media platforms, with the hashtag #LetHerFinish trending nationally. News programs across the political spectrum featured the exchange, with commentators noting the rarity of seeing the famously domineering host rendered momentarily speechless. Media analyst Carlos Mendez observed on CNN, "What made Congresswoman Crockett's response so effective wasn't that she matched O'Reilly's confrontational style. It's that she refused to engage on those terms altogether. She essentially established new rules for the interview midstream, and, remarkably, O'Reilly found himself following them." Conservative commentator Brittany Hughes, while disagreeing with Crockett's policies, acknowledged the effectiveness of her approach. "Whether you agree with her politics or not, Crockett demonstrated how to handle media figures who rely on interruption as control tactics. She was prepared, precise, and professional in a way that transcended the usual partisan bickering we see on these programs. The clip reached over 50 million views within 24 hours, with notable figures from journalism schools to celebrity entertainers sharing the exchange as a masterclass in maintaining composure under pressure. Former White House Communications Director Jennifer Palmieri tweeted, "Every public figure should study this interview. Crockett showed it's possible to be assertive without being aggressive, substantive without being defensive." For O'Reilly, the interview marked a rare public relations setback. The host, who had built his brand on never being outmaneuvered, found himself the subject of countless memes and compilation videos, contrasting his usual dominance with his visible discomfort during Crockett's responses. 3 days after the interview, O'Reilly addressed the viral moment on his podcast, attempting to reframe the narrative. "I asked tough questions, she gave detailed answers. That's how interviews should work. Some people are saying I was stunned. That's ridiculous. I was listening, which is what professional interviewers do." This explanation contradicted the visual evidence viewers had witnessed, further damaging O'Reilly's credibility. Media critics noted the irony of a host, famous for interrupting, now claiming he had simply been listening, a characterization directly contradicted by the first 5 interruptions in the interview. For Crockett, the appearance generated unexpected national attention. Morning shows and news programs requested interviews, all asking about the same moment. Consistently, she redirected these conversations toward the substance of her economic legislation rather than personal conflict with O'Reilly. "I didn't go on that program to create a viral moment," she explained on Morning Joe. "I went to discuss substantive policy solutions for communities that are often overlooked in economic discussions." The fact that maintaining professional composure while providing detailed policy explanations is considered remarkable says more about the state of our political discourse than about that particular interview. This response further enhanced Crockett's growing reputation as a serious legislator focused on substance over spectacle. Congressional colleagues noted an immediate change in how she was perceived in Washington. Before that interview, many viewed her as just another freshman representative finding her way, explained political reporter Sandra Mitchell. Afterward, even senior members who disagreed with her politics approached committee hearings differently when she was present. There was a new recognition that she couldn't be dismissed or talked over easily. Perhaps the most significant impact came from communications directors across Washington, who reported being flooded with requests from their congressional bosses, "Get me the Crockett media training." Workshops on maintaining message control under hostile questioning saw unprecedented demand from both parties. The O'Reilly-Crockett exchange even made its way into journalism school curricula, with professors using the clip to illustrate both problematic interviewing techniques and effective responses to them. Columbia Journalism School professor Richard Torres told his students, "Notice how Congresswoman Crockett addresses the underlying problem, the repeated interruptions, before returning to the substantive question. She reestablishes the ground rules for respectful discourse without becoming emotional or defensive." 6 months after the interview, the impact continued to reverberate through political media. Guests on television programs increasingly cited the Crockett approach when calling out interruptions, and hosts became noticeably more conscious about allowing complete responses, particularly from female guests who had historically faced more frequent interruptions than their male counterparts. Data analysts studying political interview patterns noted a measurable decrease in host interruptions across cable news programs in the months following the viral exchange. "We're seeing what appears to be the Crockett effect across political programming," reported media research firm Mediascope. Interruptions of guests decreased approximately 23% across all networks compared to the previous year, with the most significant decreases occurring in interviews with female political figures. For O'Reilly himself, the exchange prompted an unexpected period of reflection. 6 weeks after the interview, he invited Crockett back for a follow-up discussion, this time with a noticeably different approach. Viewers observed with surprise as the host, known for interruption, actually allowed his guest to complete multiple responses without interjection. "I think we had a productive conversation last time," O'Reilly stated at the segment's open, "and I want to continue exploring your economic proposals with the depth they deserve." This public evolution from the famously unyielding host represented perhaps the most significant impact of the original exchange, demonstrating that even the most entrenched interview styles could adapt when effectively challenged. For viewers accustomed to political interviews characterized by interruption, talking points, and performative conflict, the Crockett-O'Reilly exchange offered a glimpse of an alternative approach, one where substantive policy discussion wasn't sacrificed for entertaining confrontation. What makes this moment so significant isn't just that Congresswoman Crockett stood her ground, observed veteran political journalist Robert McKenzie. It's that she did so in a way that actually elevated the discussion, rather than just winning a shouting match. She showed that you can be both assertive and substantive, a combination rarely seen in today's political media environment. 1 year later, journalism professors, political communications directors, and media training consultants still reference the O'Reilly interview as a watershed moment in political communication. The day when a freshman congresswoman, with a trial attorney's composure, changed the rules of engagement on one of television's most combative programs. As media analyst Jennifer Crawford reflected, in an era when political discourse often resembles a professional wrestling match more than substantive debate, Congresswoman Crockett demonstrated that preparation, composure, and a refusal to be drawn into performative conflict can be more powerful than the loudest voice in the room. That's a lesson that has changed how political figures approach hostile media environments and, perhaps more importantly, how viewers expect these exchanges to unfold. The lesson for political figures across the spectrum was clear: genuine expertise, calm assertiveness, and refusal to engage on an aggressor's terms could be more effective than either defensive retreat or matching aggression with aggression. By changing the rules of engagement mid-interview, Crockett hadn't just won a momentary exchange. She had provided a template for elevating political discourse that continues to influence media interactions today. If you found this breakdown of how preparation and composure can transform confrontational interviews valuable, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more in-depth analysis of pivotal political moments. The battle for substantive political discourse continues every day, and informed viewers like you are essential to demanding better from our media and political figures alike. What other political interview moments have changed how you view media interactions? Which techniques from Congresswoman Crockett's approach do you think other public figures should adopt? Let us know in the comments below.